The city of Viramont glittered under a twilight sky bled dry of stars. Once the Blood Festival had been a day of mourning, a tribute to the humans lost in the ancient war with the vampiric highborn. Now it was spectacle, red petals scattered like torn hearts across cobbled streets, lanterns burning crimson light through iron cages, and music that mimicked the sound of slow dripping blood. And above it all, the palace loomed. Isolde Marin stood in the crowd, clutching her hands together tightly beneath her cloak. She didn't belong here. She had no family name, no noble lineage, no dowry to offer. Orphaned at 6, raised in the temple of quiet flame, she should have lived her days as a scribe or midwife. But the veil had chosen her. It was wrapped around her neck now, diaphanous red silk, impossibly soft, tied by the priestess with trembling hands that morning. Isolde hadn't known what to say. She still didn't. "You're shaking," whispered Lena, her temple sister, standing at her side. "I'm cold." It wasn't a lie. Even with the bonfires crackling across the stone square, Isolde felt cold, deep and bone-shaking, the kind of cold that came from dread. Or fate. "You'll be fine," Lena said. "They rarely pick from the lower wards. The veil probably chose you by mistake." But it hadn't. Isolde had felt it happen, like being watched, judged. The veil hadn't just wrapped itself around her neck, it had tightened, ever so slightly. A claim. The bell struck midnight. Silence rolled through the crowd. Even the music stopped. A tall figure stepped onto the obsidian platform, draped in a robe of ash-grey velvet. The announcer of blood read from the scroll. Tonight, 5 are chosen to stand beneath the eyes of the court immortal. One among them shall be selected, not as sacrifice, not as servant, but as bride. Isolde's legs almost gave beneath her. A line of guards began moving through the crowd. The first chosen was a merchant's daughter, pale, wide-eyed, shaking. The second, a foreign beauty with silver threaded through her hair. The third was a male servant from the kitchens, gasps all around. Men were almost never chosen. The fourth, a nobleman's niece who stepped forward proudly. And then, a hand on her shoulder, Isolde turned, and a guard in black armour marked her veil with a dab of blood. "The 5th, he murmured, then moved on. The world swayed. Lena's hands grabbed her, but Isolde didn't hear what she said. She could only hear the crowd and the sound of her own name echoing in the still air. She was led to the front. The other 4 chosen stood beside her, each with veils already marked. Her heart thundered. She didn't look at them. She didn't want to know their faces. The crowd bowed low as the vampires descended from the palace. Dozens of them stepping silently down crimson stone stairs, tall, elegant, otherworldly, skin like moonlight, eyes in every shade of hunger. They wore clothing centuries old and new, with blades that gleamed and jewelry made of bone and blood crystal. And then he came, the prince, Cassian Veilros, the crown's shadow, the obsidian sun. He wore black from throat to boot heels, no sigil, no ornamentation. His dark hair fell in waves to his shoulders, and his eyes, ancient garnet, met hers across the square. Isolde couldn't breathe. The other candidates shifted, preened, tried to meet his gaze. He ignored them. He walked past them all, and stopped before her. Isolde stood frozen, her hands clenched tight in her sleeves. Cassian studied her with a stillness that made the world pause. Then he reached up, not touching her skin, only the veil. He lifted the end of it, pressed it to his lips, and said, "I claim her." A ripple of noise spread through the crowd. Some gasped, others murmured. A few nobles outright turned away. "Are you certain, my prince?" the announcer asked. "There are others." "I am not blind," Cassian said coldly, "nor indecisive. She is mine." The rest moved in a blur. Isolde was taken from the stage, flanked by guards now bearing the Valenhart crest. They said nothing to her. They didn't look her in the eyes. The crowd parted before them like fog under wind. Inside the palace, everything was marble and velvet and eternal candlelight. She was led to a carriage made of midnight glass. She was placed inside, alone. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. When the carriage finally stopped, she found herself at the base of an impossibly high tower, ivy winding around its bones like veins. Above her, the crescent moon barely broke through the storm-thick sky. The guards opened the door. Isolde stepped out, heart hammering. A servant bowed low at the entrance, beckoning her inside. As she walked, she realized her fingers were bleeding from how tightly she'd gripped her hands. She was led to a chamber at the top of the tower. No chains, no locks, just velvet, dark wood, and a bed too big for any one person. Cassian was waiting there. He stood by the hearth watching the fire as if she'd arrived exactly on time. "I expected you to scream," he said, not turning, "or try to run." "I still might," she replied, breathless. That made him glance back at her. There was a flicker of something, amusement, in his eyes. "You should rest," he said. "There are rules to learn, ceremonies to endure." "Why me?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to her slowly and untied the veil from her throat. When the silk fell to the floor, he whispered, "Because you're the only one the curse didn't reject." Then he turned, walked through a door she hadn't noticed, and disappeared. Isolde was left alone, standing in the firelight, heart racing. She didn't know what she feared more, that he had a reason for choosing her, or that he didn't. And somewhere outside, beneath the moonless sky, the first snowfall of winter began to fall like ash. Isolde stared at the door that had closed behind him, fingers tracing her bare throat where the veil had been. The absence of it felt stranger than its presence had, as if a part of her had been removed. In the hours since the veil had first chosen her, she'd grown accustomed to its weight, its subtle pressure. Now only his words remained, heavy with meaning she couldn't decipher. "Because you're the only one the curse didn't reject." What curse? Why had it accepted her? And why did that matter to Cassian Vaelros, heir to the Nightlands and the most feared of all the royal bloodline? She moved to the window, pressing her palms against leaded glass. The view revealed gardens below, bone white in the falling snow, stretching toward a forest of ancient pines. Beyond that, mountains rose like jagged teeth against the horizon. How far from the city had they travelled? Hours, surely. She hadn't watched the road, too consumed by the thunder of her own heart. A soft knock at the chamber door startled her. "Enter," she said, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice. The door opened to reveal a woman, small, grey-haired, with eyes too large for her face. She wore a simple black dress with a silver pin at her throat, the mark of a human servant to the highborn. "My lady," the woman said, curtsying low. "I am Edith. I've been assigned to attend you." "I'm not a lady," Isolde said automatically. Edith's mouth tightened into a small, pained smile. "You are now, my lady. Whatever you were before, you are now the chosen of Prince Cassian." "What does that mean?" Isolde asked, desperate for any clarity. "What happens now?" Edith entered the room fully, closing the door behind her. Her movements were quick and practiced, as she began lighting more candles around the chamber. "Tonight you rest," she said. "Tomorrow the binding." "The binding?" "The ceremony that will seal your arrangement with the prince." Edith's voice was carefully blank. "It is tradition." "What arrangement? I don't understand any of this." Edith paused in her work, studying Isolde with a gaze that seemed to see too much. "No one told you?" It wasn't a question. "Told me what?" Isolde asked, her voice smaller now. "When a highborn chooses a mortal at the blood festival, it is not a temporary arrangement. It is a bond. Forever. Or," she glanced away, "for as long as you live." Isolde felt her knees weaken. She sank onto the edge of the massive bed, its silk coverlet cool beneath her hands. "What will he do to me?" she whispered. Edith's face softened with something like pity. "That depends on him. Some are kind masters. Others—" She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. Prince Cassian has never chosen a bride before. In all the centuries of the Blood Festival, he has never participated. Then why? It is not my place to question the prince's motives, Edith said sharply. Then, more gently, come, you must prepare for the night. You'll need your strength for tomorrow. Isolde wanted to resist, to demand more answers, but exhaustion suddenly weighed on her like stone. She allowed Edith to help her undress, to wash her face with water scented with night-blooming flowers, to brush out her long dark hair until it shone in the firelight. When she was finally alone, dressed in a nightgown of silver silk that had been laid out for her, Isolde didn't immediately go to bed. Instead, she tried the door Cassian had disappeared through. Locked. She tried the main door to the hallway. Also locked. She was a prisoner then, even if the cage was beautiful. She returned to the window, watching the snow fall heavier now, coating the world in silence. In the distance, something moved through the trees, a shadow darker than the night itself. Isolde blinked and it was gone. When sleep finally came, it was restless and filled with dreams of ruby eyes and a voice whispering ancient words she couldn't understand. Morning arrived like a held breath, silent, pale, and waited with anticipation. Isolde woke to find Edith already in her chamber, laying out a gown of deepest crimson on the bed. "It's time," the servant said, avoiding Isolde's eyes. "For what?" Isolde asked, though she already knew. "The binding." The word hung in the air between them. They didn't speak as Edith helped Isolde bathe in water scattered with rose petals and small blue flowers Isolde didn't recognize. The servant washed her hair with oils that smelled of amber and cedar, then dried it until it fell in dark waves past her shoulders. The gown, when Isolde finally stepped into it, felt like wearing liquid fire, heavy silk that clung to her form before falling in a cascade to pool at her feet. The sleeves ended at her wrists, the neckline modestly high but cut to expose her shoulders and the line of her collarbones. Against her pale skin, the colour made her look as if she were already bleeding. "Perfect," Edith murmured, stepping back to survey her work. "Do I look like a bride?" Isolde asked, voice hollow. Edith's expression flickered. "You look like what you are." "The chosen." A knock at the door prevented further conversation. 2 guards entered, their faces expressionless beneath helmets of polished black metal. "It's time," one said. Isolde followed them from the chamber, down winding stairs that seemed to spiral endlessly into the heart of the castle. Edith walked behind, carrying the train of Isolde's gown to keep it from trailing on the stone. They emerged into a vast hall lit by hundreds of candles. Shadows danced across walls of onyx and silver, and the ceiling arched so high above that it disappeared into darkness. At the far end stood an altar of black stone, its surface carved with symbols Isolde didn't recognize. And, waiting beside it, Cassian. He wore formal attire now. A jacket of black velvet with silver embroidery at the collar and cuffs, trousers of the same midnight fabric, and boots that gleamed like obsidian. A chain of silver links hung across his chest, each link set with a small blood-red stone. Behind him stood a semicircle of vampires, nobles, judging by their finery and the cold, calculating look in their eyes as Isolde approached. None smiled. None spoke. Isolde's footsteps echoed as she walked the length of the hall. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. She kept her gaze fixed on Cassian, who watched her approach with an expression she couldn't read. When she reached the altar, he extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her own in it. His skin was cool, not cold as she'd expected, but cooler than a human's. His grip was firm but not painful. "Let it be witnessed," said a voice from the shadows. An ancient vampire stepped forward, his white hair falling past his shoulders, his face lined with age despite his immortality. One of the original turned, Isolde realized. Those who had been made vampire before the bloodlines stabilized into their current form. Prince Cassian of House Valenhart has chosen a mortal bride, the elder continued, as is his right by blood and law. The Vale has accepted her, the court has witnessed. Now only the binding remains. He gestured to the altar. Upon its surface lay a dagger of crystal, its handle bone-white, its blade clear as water. "Your hands," the elder said. Cassian placed his left hand on the altar, palm up. After a heartbeat's hesitation, Isolde did the same, layering her smaller hand atop his. The elder took the dagger. "Blood calls to blood," he intoned. "Life binds to life. What is sealed here cannot be broken. What is pledged here cannot be forsworn." With a swift movement, he drew the blade across their layered palms. Isolde gasped at the sting, watching as her blood welled up, bright crimson, and mingled with Cassian's, darker, almost black in the candlelight. "Speak your name, mortal," the elder commanded. "Isolde Marin," she whispered. "And do you, Isolde Marin, consent to be bound to Prince Cassian of House Valenhart, to serve as his companion, his solace and his bride until death claims you?" She hesitated. Did she have a choice? Could she refuse? But when she glanced at Cassian, something in his eyes stopped her. Not threat, not command, something almost like pleading. "I consent," she said. The words tasted like ash on her tongue. "And do you, Prince Cassian, accept this mortal as your chosen, to protect her life, to honour her service, and to keep her as your bride until death claims her?" "I accept," Cassian said, his voice deep and certain. The elder nodded, satisfaction in his ancient eyes. "Then by blood and by oath, I declare you bound. What the Vale has chosen, let no power sunder." He wrapped a length of silver cord around their bleeding hands, binding them together. As the cord tightened, Isolde felt a strange sensation, like liquid fire flowing from their joined wounds into her veins, spreading up her arm and into her chest. She gasped, swaying on her feet. Cassian's free hand steadied her at the waist. "Breathe through it," he murmured, for her ears alone. "It will pass." The burning intensified, then slowly faded to a gentle warmth that settled somewhere behind her heart. When the elder removed the cord, she saw that their wounds had closed, leaving only faint silver lines across their palms. "It is done," the elder announced. "The court acknowledges Lady Isolde as the chosen of Prince Cassian. Let the celebration begin." A sound like distant thunder rolled through the hall as the assembled vampires struck their palms against the stone pillars, once, twice, 3 times. The formal recognition of a binding completed, Cassian's hand still held hers. "Come," he said quietly, leading her toward a door at the side of the hall. She followed, her legs moving automatically while her mind struggled to process what had just happened. She'd been bound to him, by blood and by magic. But what did that mean? What had she agreed to? As they left the ceremonial hall, she noticed the nobles watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. One woman, tall with hair like spun gold and lips painted black, smiled at her with such malice that Isolde instinctively moved closer to Cassian. He noticed, following her gaze to the golden-haired vampire. "Duchess Merith," he said, voice cold. "You need not fear her, not while you're with me." "And when I'm not with you?" Isolde asked. His mouth quirked, not quite a smile. "Learn to be quick and clever." He led her through a maze of corridors until they reached a small courtyard open to the sky. Snow fell gently, melting as it touched the stones warmed by underground heat. A fountain burbled at the centre, its water steaming slightly in the winter air. Here, away from watching eyes, Cassian released her hand and turned to face her. "You have questions," he said. "Hundreds," she replied. He gestured to a stone bench. "Sit, ask." She remained standing. "What is a chosen exactly? What am I to you now?" "Officially, my consort, my companion." "And unofficially?" His eyes met hers, direct and unblinking. A solution. To what problem? That is complicated. Isolde felt anger flare within her, a welcome heat after hours of fear and confusion. You've bound me to you with blood and magic, she said. You've taken me from everything I've ever known. The least you could do is tell me why. For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then he sighed, a surprisingly human sound. I need a bride, he said simply. The king, my father, has decreed it, for reasons of his own. I've refused for centuries. Now I can refuse no longer. So you chose me? Why? There were others. None who could serve my purpose. Witches. He stepped closer, and Isolde forced herself not to retreat. He towered over her, his presence like a shadow made flesh. To defy my father, he said softly, without seeming to defy him. I don't understand. No, you wouldn't. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with unexpected gentleness. But you will. In time. His touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. The binding, she said. What does it do? It connects us. Allows me to sense your location, your general condition. It prevents others of my kind from claiming you. And it... He hesitated. It makes your blood unique, sacred, mine alone. Understanding dawned cold and terrifying. You're going to drink from me. It wasn't a question. No, he said, surprising her. I am not. That is what makes this arrangement unusual. I don't. Most vampire lords take mortal brides for blood and pleasure, he said bluntly. I have no intention of using you for either. Relief flooded her, followed quickly by suspicion. Then what use am I to you? You are a symbol, Isolde Marin. Nothing more. A sign of my compliance with my father's wishes. You will live in comfort. You will want for nothing. In return, you will appear at my side when required. You will learn our ways, our politics, and you will say nothing of our arrangement. And if I refuse? His expression hardened. You cannot. The binding is complete, but if you prove difficult... He let the words hang between them. Isolde lifted her chin. You'll what? Kill me? No, he said, and there was something like sadness in his voice. But others might. The court is not a safe place for mortals, Isolde, especially not one with my mark upon her. The threat was clear enough. Behave or face consequences beyond his control. How long? She asked. How long must I be your symbol? Until I no longer need one. Oh. And when will that be? I don't know, he admitted. But I suspect not long. Months, perhaps. A year at most. A year. She could endure a year, couldn't she? Even in this strange, terrifying place. And then? Then you will be free. With wealth enough to live as you please. Far from here. It was more than she'd expected. Less than she deserved. Do we have an understanding? He asked. Isolde considered her options. She had none, really, but she would not show him weakness. We do, she said. My lord. The title was laced with just enough sarcasm to make his eyes narrow. Cassian, he corrected. When we are alone, you will call me Cassian. As you wish. Cassian. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate somehow. He nodded, satisfied. Come. The court expects us to feast, to celebrate our union. He offered his arm, formal and distant once more. Isolde took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the velvet of his jacket. As they walked back toward the main hall, she risked a glance at his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the curve of his mouth, the impossible length of his lashes. He was beautiful, she realized, terribly, inhumanly beautiful. And she was bound to him until he decided otherwise. Remember, he murmured as they approached the feast hall, in public, you are my devoted bride, my treasure. Do nothing to suggest otherwise. I'm a poor actress, she warned. Then learn quickly, he replied. Your life may depend on it. With those words hanging between them, they entered the hall. The feast was like nothing Isolde had ever experienced. Tables stretched the length of a hall that could have housed the entire Temple of Quiet Flame. Candelabras of silver and bone cast dancing light over settings of crystal and platinum. Immortal nobles lounged on chairs draped with furs and silks, their beauty as terrible as it was perfect, and the food, mountains of delicacies from across the known world, fruits out of season, meats prepared in ways she'd never imagined, wine that glowed like liquid rubies in goblets of clear crystal. But the vampires consumed almost none of it. Instead, they drank from goblets of black glass, their lips staining darker with each sip. Isolde knew what filled those goblets. She tried not to think about it. Cassian led her to a raised table at the head of the hall. There, an older vampire sat in a chair that could only be described as a throne, carved from a single piece of obsidian, inlaid with veins of silver that caught the light like frozen lightning. The king. His resemblance to Cassian was unmistakable, the same sculpted features, the same midnight hair, though the king's was streaked with silver at the temples. But where Cassian's eyes were garnet, the king's were black, depthless, ancient, and utterly without warmth. "My son," the king said, his voice carrying easily over the murmur of the feast. "At last you bring us a bride." Cassian bowed, the gesture just deep enough to satisfy protocol, not enough to suggest true deference. "Father," he acknowledged, "may I present Lady Isolde Marin, now of House Valenhart." Isolde curtsied, grateful for the hours spent practicing court etiquette at the temple. The king studied her with those black eyes, and she fought the urge to shiver. A curious choice, the king mused. No family name of note, no great beauty, no obvious talents. The insult stung, but Isolde kept her expression carefully blank. "Beauty fades," Cassian replied. "Even for us. I prefer substance to decoration." The king's laugh was a cold thing. "Do you indeed? How practical of you." He waved a hand, dismissing them. "Seat yourselves. Let us celebrate this long-awaited union." Cassian led Isolde to two vacant chairs near the king's right hand. As he pulled out her chair, he leaned close to her ear. "Well done," he murmured. "Keep silent unless directly addressed. Eat if you wish. Drink only what I pour for you." She nodded slightly, taking her seat. The feast continued around them, conversations like knives wrapped in silk, politics and plots threaded through every exchange. Isolde ate sparingly, hypersensitive to the eyes that watched her from all directions. Beside her, Cassian drank from a goblet of the black glass but ate nothing. When he refilled her wine goblet, he did so personally, allowing no servant to touch it. The gesture wasn't lost on the nobles watching, a display of possession, of protection. "Tell me, Lady Isolde," the king said suddenly, his voice cutting through the surrounding conversation, "what talents do you bring to my son's household?" All eyes turned to her. Cassian tensed beside her, but she spoke before he could intervene. "I was raised in the Temple of Quiet Flame, Your Majesty," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am trained in the healing arts, in the reading of ancient texts, and in the keeping of records." "A scribe, then," the king said dismissively, "hardly fitting for a prince's consort." "On the contrary," Cassian interjected smoothly, "in a court where whispers become weapons, someone trained to observe and record will prove invaluable." The king's eyes narrowed. "And is that why you chose her, my son? For her observational skills?" "I chose her because the veil accepted her," Cassian replied. "The magic recognized her as mine. Who am I to question such ancient power?" Something passed between father and son, a current of tension, of unspoken challenge. "Indeed," the king said finally, "who are any of us to question the veil's wisdom? Though I confess, I find it strange that of all the mortals in Viremont, it should choose one so unremarkable." Isolde flushed, anger warring with embarrassment. "The veil sees what we cannot, sire. she said, unable to remain silent in the face of his disdain. Perhaps what seems unremarkable to immortal eyes holds value invisible to those who have forgotten what it means to be human. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby nobles. Cassian's hand closed over hers beneath the table. A warning. But to her surprise, the king laughed. A genuine sound of amusement. "Perhaps she has a spine after all," he said to Cassian. "You may not have chosen as poorly as I thought." Cassian's grip on her hand relaxed slightly. "She will surprise you, father," he said, "as she has surprised me." The king raised his goblet in a mocking toast. "To surprises, then," he said. "May they continue to entertain us." The feast continued, but Isolde noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The nobles watched her with new interest, some speculative, some hostile. She had made an impression. Whether that was good or dangerous remained to be seen. Hours passed in a blur of faces and names Isolde struggled to remember. Nobles approached to offer congratulations that felt more like assessments. Ladies of the court studied her gown, her hair, her every movement with predatory attention to detail. Through it all, Cassian remained at her side, his hand occasionally at the small of her back, guiding, warning, steadying. It was past midnight when he finally leaned close to her ear. "Enough," he said softly. "We've satisfied protocol. We can leave." Relief flooded her. Her head ached from tension, her cheeks from maintaining a careful smile. "Thank you," she whispered. They made their formal goodbyes to the king and the court. Then Cassian led her through torch-lit corridors, back toward the tower where her chamber waited. As they walked, Isolde's awareness of him heightened. The binding, perhaps, or merely exhaustion lowering her defenses. She found herself noticing the grace of his movements, the perfect symmetry of his features, the way his presence seemed to fill the space around him. He was a predator, she reminded herself. No matter how civilized he appeared, no matter what arrangement they had reached. They were nearly at her chamber when Isolde noticed a shadow detach itself from an alcove ahead. A figure in a hooded cloak, face hidden in darkness. "Prince Cassian," a voice called, soft, raspy, genderless. "Or should I say by a bridegroom?" Cassian stopped, pushing Isolde slightly behind him. "Virel," he said, weariness and wariness mingled in his voice. "Now is not the time." "When is the time, my prince?" the cloaked figure asked. "Before or after the binding kills her?" Isolde stiffened. "You speak of things you don't understand," Cassian said coldly. "Do I?" The figure glided closer. "Or do I understand too well?" A pale hand emerged from the cloak, skin nearly translucent, veins visible beneath like blue threads. The hand reached toward Isolde, who found herself unable to move. "The veil chose her," the figure Virel whispered. "But did it choose right? Or has it merely selected another sacrifice?" Cassian stepped fully between them. "Enough," he commanded. "Return to your tower, Virel. Your visions are not welcome here." "Visions cannot be welcomed or banished, my prince. They simply are." The figure retreated a step, then fixed its gaze on Isolde. Though she couldn't see the eyes beneath the hood, she felt them. Burning, ancient, seeing too much. "Blood calls to blood," Virel whispered. "But whose blood calls to yours, little bride? His, or something far older?" Before Cassian could respond, the figure melted back into the shadows, disappearing as if it had never been. Isolde found her voice at last. "Who was that?" "The court seer," Cassian replied, his expression tight. "Once advisor to the king, now. Less than that. More than that. Ignore her words. They're meant to unsettle." "She spoke of the binding killing me," Isolde said, her heart racing. "Is that possible?" Cassian hesitated, and in that moment of silence Isolde knew he was deciding whether to lie. "No," he said finally, "not in your case." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, taking her arm to continue their walk to her chamber, "that you and I have an agreement. And part of that agreement is my protection. I will not allow the binding to harm you." It wasn't a full answer. It wasn't even close. But Isolde was too exhausted to press further. The day had been too long, too overwhelming. Her mind felt stuffed with cobwebs and questions she no longer had the strength to ask. They reached her chamber door. "Rest," Cassian said, opening it for her. "Tomorrow will bring new challenges." "More ceremonies?" she asked, dismayed. "No, instruction. There is much you must learn if you are to survive at court." He hesitated, then added, "I am not patient by nature, but I will try to be. With you." It was as close to an apology as she was likely to get, for the binding, for the confusion, for all of it. "Good night, Cassian," she said, too tired to maintain formality. "Good night, Isolde." As she entered her chamber, she glanced back. He stood watching her, his expression unreadable in the torch-lit corridor. For a moment, she thought he might say something more. But then he turned and walked away, his steps silent on the stone. The door closed behind her with a soft but definitive click. Alone again, Isolde sank onto the edge of the bed, her crimson gown pooling around her like spilled blood. She touched her palm where the crystal blade had cut her, tracing the silver line that now marked her skin. Bound to a vampire prince, trapped in a castle of immortals who barely acknowledged her humanity, caught in a game whose rules she didn't understand, and somewhere in the shadows, a seer whose words carried the weight of prophecy. The binding kills her. Isolde shivered, drawing her knees up to her chest. What had she agreed to? What power now flowed in her veins, binding her to Cassian? And what was he not telling her? Outside her window, snow continued to fall, silent and relentless, covering the world in white. But beneath that pristine blanket, Isolde knew, secrets grew like thorns, waiting to draw blood.